Welcome to the Deep Dive from RTV Global Network. I am host speaker, and sitting across from me is expert speaker.
Hey, ready to sort through the noise today?
Yeah, we really have an immense amount of ground to cover. Just for the record, today is Tuesday, the 21st of July, 2026. And, for everyone listening, I want to ask you a question. What does an exploding oil tanker in the Middle East, a massive 50% tariff slapped on the Canadian border, and the rising price of eggs in a local market in Sri Lanka have in common?
Right, they sound totally disconnected.
Exactly. If you're just skimming the headlines, they look like completely isolated events. A political dispute here, a military strike over there, a local economic complaint somewhere else. But today, we're unpacking a massive stack of intelligence that proves how aggressively these events are, well, they're bleeding into one another. We're looking at a global system where local chaos is actively rewriting the rules of your personal economy.
Yeah, and the through line connecting literally every piece of intelligence we have today is friction. I mean, we're witnessing this intense friction between hyper-advanced technological ambitions like, artificial intelligence and commercial space flight colliding head-on with fundamental, undeniable human bottlenecks.
Right.
We were talking about basic public health, the availability of food, and honestly, the sheer structural integrity of the institutions we rely on just to keep the lights on.
It's a lot to process, so I say let's start where the political tremors are currently the loudest.
Yeah.
The geopolitical map is being redrawn, as we speak, and a massive part of that redraw is happening in London right now. Andy Burnham has officially become the United Kingdom's Prime Minister.
Yeah, big news.
He's had the formal meeting with King Charles III at Buckingham Palace.
I mean, the pace of leadership changes in the UK over the last decade has just been dizzying. We're seeing a parliamentary system operating under extreme stress, right? Just cycling through leaders to find a political frequency that actually resonates with what is a deeply fractured electorate.
But, the way his predecessor left is what really caught my eye. Keir Starmer stepped down, and his parting statement was incredibly abrupt. He essentially just said, my work is done.
Yep.
And then almost before the door closes, Burnham steps out to the podium and unveils a bold plan to rebuild Britain. I look at that sequence of events, and I have to wonder, is this a genuine ideological shift? Or are we just looking at a corporate rebranding?
How do you mean?
When a struggling company brings in a new CEO, they change the logo, they promise this whole new paradigm, but then you boot up the software and it still has the exact same bugs.
Right, I get that. But the corporate rebranding analogy, it kind of misses a critical mechanism of how a parliamentary democracy functions, especially regarding market psychology.
Okay, break that down.
When Starmer says my work is done, he's attempting to dictate the historical narrative. He's trying to frame his tenure as this stabilization phase, a completed mission. By creating that narrative vacuum, he allows Burnham to step in not as a crisis manager, but as an architect. The phrase rebuild Britain isn't just a slogan. It's specifically engineered for the bond markets and foreign investors.
So wait, what do the bond markets care about the word rebuild?
Well, markets absolutely despise uncertainty, right?
Right.
But they love infrastructure. They love structural investment. If you just say you're managing the economy, investors assume stagnation. But if you say you are rebuilding, it implies this forthcoming injection of capital. It suggests new policies on zoning, construction, technology subsidies, trade relations.
So they're listening for the money.
Exactly. The global stage, particularly post-Brexit Europe and the U.S., they're watching incredibly closely to see if Burnham's definition of rebuilding leans towards protectionism, like subsidizing domestic industries and raising walls, or expansionism, lowering regulatory barriers to bring foreign money back into London.
That makes a lot of sense. But because Starmer's exit was so sudden, foreign diplomats and, currency traders didn't get a long runway to prepare for this.
They didn't, no. Which means you are going to see immense sensitivity in the currency markets this week. The pound sterling will fluctuate wildly based on the very first budget Burnham proposes. Every single word his chancellor speaks will be dissected to figure out who is actually paying for this rebuild.
Right. And if London is attempting to project this sense of managed transition, Washington is projecting an entirely different kind of unpredictability outward. The United States is engaging in aggressive economic and military maneuvers at the exact same time.
Oh, absolutely.
U.S. President Donald Trump just slapped a 50% tariff on Canada. And the stated reason is direct retaliation for filthy air from Canadian wildfires drifting south and blanketing U.S. cities.
We really need to pause and examine the sheer mechanics of a 50% tariff here.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a minor regulatory adjustment to protect a specific vulnerable industry. This is an economic sledgehammer.
Right. And just to be completely clear to you listening, our role here on this deep dive is not to take a political stance on the administration's actions or the environmental justifications. We are just analyzing the raw cause and effect. And a 50% tariff on a nation that shares the longest undefended border in the world with highly integrated supply chains is pretty much unprecedented. In response, Mark Carney has stated he will intensify trade talks. But how does this actually play out on the ground?
Well, let's track a single product. Think about the North American automotive industry, right?
Okay.
A single car part might cross the U.S.-Canada border 6 or 7 times before the vehicle is fully assembled and sold. An engine block might be cast in Ontario, shipped to Michigan for machining, sent back to Canada for partial assembly.
Wow, just back and forth.
Exactly, and then returned to the U.S. for final installation. If a 50% tariff is applied, the cost of that cross-border transit just artificially doubles overnight.
So who eats that cost? The Canadian factories.
The consumer, ultimately. The American manufacturer relying on Canadian raw materials like timber or aluminum or agricultural products suddenly sees their operating costs explode. They have no choice but to pass that cost onto the American consumer. The justification linking a trade penalty to an environmental externality, the smoke from the wildfires, that is a highly unusual deployment of economic leverage.
Yeah, it's a completely new playbook.
Right. So Carney's vow to intensify talks is diplomatic speak for recognizing an existential threat to Canada's export economy. Canada simply cannot absorb a 50% premium on its goods going to its largest trading partner without sliding into a severe recession.
It's massive. But the volatility out of Washington, it doesn't stop at the Canadian border. Our sources show that simultaneously, President Trump announced that U.S. military strikes hit Iran very hard. The stated reason was in honor of American soldiers who were killed. And almost immediately following that military action, Iran reports that 2 oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz have exploded and are currently immobilized.
Yeah, and you cannot view the trade war in North America and the kinetic war in the Middle East as separate files. They completely compound each other. The Strait of Hormuz is arguably the most vital geopolitical choke point on the entire planet. It's this narrow waterway sitting right between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. At its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only a few miles wide.
And a massive percentage of the world's energy flows through that specific bottleneck, right?
Roughly 20% of the world's total global oil consumption transits through that strait. So when 2 oil tankers explode and are immobilized there, it is not just a maritime emergency. It is a myocardial infarction for the global energy supply.
So walk me through the immediate domino effect of those tankers burning. What happens on day one?
Within hours of the explosions, the maritime insurance markets in London and New York react. The premiums to insure a commercial vessel transiting the Persian Gulf just absolutely skyrocket.
Because the risk is too high.
Right. Some major shipping conglomerates will simply refuse to enter the waterway at all. They'll order their fleets to drop anchor and wait for military escorts to guarantee their safety. And that creates an immediate bottleneck in the physical supply of crude oil.
And even just the fear of a shortage drives the price up, doesn't it?
Exactly. Crude oil prices spike instantly. And when the foundational cost of energy spikes, the cost of literally everything else follows.
Yeah.
The diesel required to transport goods across that U.S.-Canada border, more expensive. The aviation fuel for cargo planes, more expensive. Inflationary pressure builds globally in a matter of days. This is the definitive example of how a localized military strike and an explosion in a distant strait eventually dictate the price of fuel you pay at a local pump, whether you live in, Colombo, Tokyo, or Berlin.
Which brings us to how the rest of the world is reacting to these tectonic shifts, specifically over in Asia. The tension is incredibly palpable across the region right now. Taiwan just announced the suspension of tourist visas for Sri Lankans, citing an update to their visa policy. Now, on its own, a visa policy update sounds like boring bureaucracy, but the sources pair this with Taiwan reporting a sudden, sharp jump in Chinese vessel activity in their waters, which is raising serious fears for Pacific maritime supply routes.
Yeah, when you look at the correlation, the visa suspension looks entirely like a security posture. When a nation feels its sovereignty is being encroached upon, especially an island nation that is hyper-reliant on open maritime trade routes, it initiates a defensive contraction.
So you think they're restricting entry from certain nations to tighten up their internal security grid?
It's a very common administrative tactic during periods of heightened alert. Suspending tourist visas for specific demographics or nationalities allows the state to control exactly who is inside their borders. It minimizes the risk of foreign espionage or internal disruption, while their military apparatus is completely focused outward on those Chinese vessels. It really highlights how quickly diplomatic channels freeze up when military anxiety rises.
Right, and we're seeing this anxiety manifest in deeply contrasting ways across the major Asian powers. Let's